I should have walked out after 30 minutes. Most people would have, but I kept sitting there, staring at an empty chair that was supposed to belong to someone who already knew too much about me. And the worst part, I actually believed she was still coming. My name's Adrien Cole, I'm 29, a back-end developer in Seattle, the kind of guy who spends most of his life fixing invisible problems in code, while slowly creating invisible problems in his own life. And that night, I was starting to realize I might be the kind of guy who waits too long for people who aren't coming. It was 7 p.m. when I texted her, "I'm here. Take your time." The message delivered instantly, but the read receipt never appeared. At first I told myself it was normal. Seattle traffic, parking nightmares, phones dying, all the usual excuses people invent when they don't want to admit the obvious. By 7:20 I was scrolling through our messages again, like proof that this wasn't some elaborate prank. 3 weeks of conversations, memes about nightmare clients, late-night talks about playlists and coffee rituals, little confessions about how neither of us really felt like adults yet. Madison Reed, freelance graphic designer, the girl who made dating apps feel almost human again. She'd even sent me a picture of the blue dress she planned to wear tonight. I remember staring at it longer than I should have, and thinking, maybe this one will actually work. At 7:35, the waiter came by again. "Still waiting on someone?" he asked gently. I forced a casual smile. "Yeah, she's probably running late." But when he walked away, the embarrassment started creeping in. Couples were filling the restaurant now, laughing, ordering wine, sharing appetizers. And there I was, sitting alone at a table meant for two, trying to look like I belonged there. At 7:45, I told myself 5 more minutes. Just 5. Then I'd leave. That's when the restaurant door opened. A woman walked in. She wasn't wearing the blue dress. She wasn't Madison, but she looked straight at me, like she already knew exactly who I was. And then she walked directly to my table. "Are you Adrien?" she asked. I blinked. "Yeah, who are you?" She pulled out the chair across from me and sat down like she owned the place. Then she sighed and said something that made my entire night flip upside down. "I'm Madison's roommate." She leaned forward slightly. "And I'm here instead." For a second, I honestly thought she was joking. Not a funny joke, more like the kind someone makes when they're about to deliver bad news. I stared at her, waiting for the punchline. It never came. She sat there calmly, elbows on the table, like this was the most normal thing in the world. "I'm Sienna," she said, extending her hand. I shook it automatically. Her grip was warm, confident, too confident for someone delivering a disaster. "So," I said slowly, "where's Madison?" Sienna glanced at the empty chair beside her, then back at me. "She's not coming." She said it gently, but it still landed like a dropped glass. I leaned back in my seat, rubbing the back of my neck. "Okay, did something happen?" Sienna gave a small, frustrated laugh. "Yeah, panic happened." The waiter appeared beside us, clearly confused. "Everything all right here?" Sienna didn't miss a beat. "Vodka soda, please." Then she looked back at me. "And whatever he's having." I blinked. "I already ordered." "Good," she said. "You deserve to eat something tonight." I didn't know whether to laugh or leave. "So Madison just bailed?" I asked. Sienna exhaled slowly, staring at the table for a moment. "She spent the whole day pacing the apartment, talking about how you seemed too good to be real, how the date would probably be awkward, how she'd mess it up." I frowned. That sounds like something she should have told me. "Exactly." Sienna finally met my eyes again. I told her that too. There was something sharp in her expression, not embarrassment, annoyance. "She said she'd text you," Sienna continued. But then she just sat there staring at her phone like it was a bomb. I glanced down at mine, still unread. A small, bitter laugh escaped me. "Great." Sienna studied me carefully. "You're taking this better than most guys would." "Trust me," I said quietly. "I'm not." For a moment we just sat there in the dim restaurant light. 2 strangers, 1 empty chair between us. Then Sienna leaned forward slightly and said something that caught me completely off guard. "I came because I couldn't let you sit here like this." I frowned. "You didn't have to do that." "I know." She picked up the menu. "But since I'm already here..." She looked up with a small, crooked smile. "Want to have dinner with me instead?" And somehow, that simple question made the night feel less like humiliation, and more like the beginning of something I hadn't expected. I probably should have said no. That would have been the logical thing. Finish the wine, pay the bill, go home and delete the dating app like I'd promised myself I would a dozen times before. Instead, I heard myself say something else. "Okay," I said. Sienna's eyebrow lifted slightly like she hadn't expected that answer. Okay? Yeah, I shrugged. But we split the bill. Her mouth curved into the first real smile I'd seen from her all night. Deal. Something about that smile loosened the knot that had been sitting in my chest. Since 7 p.m., the waiter returned with her drink and looked between us like he was trying to piece together the situation. Sienna raised her glass casually. Change of plans, she said. He nodded slowly and walked off. For a few seconds, we both sat there in an awkward silence that felt strangely comfortable. Then she glanced at my half-eaten bruschetta. You been waiting long? About 45 minutes. She winced. Ouch. Yeah. She took a sip of her vodka soda and studied me for a moment. You could have left. I thought about it. So why didn't you? I hesitated. It felt weird admitting the truth to someone I'd known for 5 minutes. But something about Sienna made honesty feel easier than usual. I guess I wanted to believe she'd show up, I admitted. Sienna nodded slowly, like that answer didn't surprise her. Madison does that sometimes. What? Gets excited about something, then talks herself out of it. I leaned back in my chair. And you? What about me? You seem like the opposite. She smirked slightly. That's because I am. Our food arrived a few minutes later, pasta for both of us. The smell of garlic and basil filled the air, suddenly reminding me I hadn't eaten all day. Sienna twirled her fork, then paused. Just so you know, she said casually, I didn't come here out of pity. Oh? She looked straight at me. Madison talked about you a lot. That caught my attention. Good things, I hope. Sienna shrugged. She said you were decent. Decent? Yeah, she said, taking a bite of pasta, which is surprisingly rare. I laughed despite myself. Then she added something that made my stomach flip in a way I wasn't prepared for. But I wanted to see for myself. Her eyes held mine for a second longer than necessary, and suddenly, this didn't feel like a replacement date anymore. It felt like the beginning of a completely different story, one I definitely hadn't planned for. Dinner should have felt awkward. Two strangers eating pasta because the original date bailed. But somehow, it didn't. In fact, after the first 10 minutes, I completely forgot why we were there in the first place. Sienna had this way of talking that pulled you in. Not loud, not dramatic, just real. So you're a back-end developer? She asked, resting her chin on her hand. Yeah. That means? It means when apps break, people like me get blamed. She laughed, and it wasn't the polite kind. It was full and unfiltered. Sounds miserable. It is. Imagine spending 6 hours fixing something no one will ever see. So you're basically the plumbing system of the internet. I blinked, and that's actually the best explanation I've ever heard. She grinned like she was proud of herself. Then she took another sip of her drink and leaned back in her chair. My job's worse. What do you do? Bartender. Downtown? She nodded. Place called Ember Room. Oh, wow, I said. That must be interesting. That's a polite way to say chaotic. She twirled her fork thoughtfully. You learn a lot about people when they've had 2 drinks too many. Like what? She met my eyes again. Like who they really are when they stop pretending. Something about the way she said that made the moment feel heavier. More honest. So, she said suddenly, why are you on dating apps? I laughed quietly. Honestly, I almost wasn't. What changed? You. She blinked. Me? Well, in Madison technically. She rolled her eyes immediately. Right. I leaned forward slightly. Her profile felt normal. How refreshing. No filters. No weird motivational quotes. Just a person. Sienna watched me for a second, studying my face like she was trying to read something deeper. Then she said something that caught me off guard. You're exactly how she described you. That good or bad? Confusing. Confusing? She nodded slowly. Yeah. I frowned. How? She shrugged, but her voice softened just a little. Because guys who sit alone for an hour waiting for someone, she paused, holding my gaze, usually aren't the same guys who laugh this easily afterward. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she added quietly, and now I'm curious. About what? I asked. She tilted her head slightly. Whether Madison was right about the rest of you too. And the way she said it made it feel like this dinner had suddenly turned into something much more personal than either of us expected. By the time the tiramisu arrived, it didn't feel like a rescue dinner anymore. It felt like a real date, which was strange, considering the woman who was supposed to be my date had disappeared completely. Sienna pushed the dessert plate toward the middle of the table. Shared dessert, she said. That feels less weird. Less weird than what? Than me eating an entire tiramisu while a stranger watches. Fair point. We both laughed softly, and something about that moment felt warm, comfortable, dangerously comfortable. I took a bite first. Madison had been right about one thing. The tiramisu was incredible. Sienna watched my reaction with amusement. Worth the humiliation? I sighed dramatically. Honestly, maybe. She shook her head. You're handling this way too well. I set my fork down. You keep saying that. Because it's true, she said. Most guys would have been angry. Oh, I was. Were? Yeah. I glanced toward the restaurant entrance. That part happened during the first 30 minutes. And now? I looked back at her. Now I'm having dinner with someone else. Her lips curved into a small smile. That's a good recovery strategy. We finished the tiramisu slowly, conversation drifting into lighter things. Seattle rent, terrible clients, the weird pressure of getting close to 30, without feeling like you figured anything out yet. At one point, she told me about a regular at her bar, who wrote terrible poetry on napkins and demanded she critique it. Please tell me you lie to him. Of course, she said. I'm not a monster. I laughed, shaking my head, but somewhere in the middle of all that easy conversation, a quiet thought slipped into my mind, something I hadn't expected. What if this night hadn't been ruined? What if it had redirected? The waiter dropped the bill on the table. I reached for it immediately. Sienna reached too. Nope, she said. We agreed to split. That was before dessert. That doesn't change the deal. She studied me for a second, then smirked. You're stubborn. So are you. She leaned back and sighed. Fine, split. We stepped outside a few minutes later into the cool Seattle night. Streetlights glowing, a soft breeze moving through the empty parking lot. Sienna pulled out her phone. Give me your number. I blinked. For Madison, I asked. She looked at me like I'd said something ridiculous. No. Then she typed quickly and slipped her phone back into her jacket. For me. And for some reason, that simple answer made my heart beat a little faster than it probably should have. The strange thing about that night wasn't the disaster. It was how quickly Madison disappeared from my thoughts afterward. By the time I got home, kicked off my shoes, and sat on the edge of my couch, I realized something unsettling. I hadn't thought about her once during the drive back. Not her unread messages, not the empty chair, not the hour I'd spent looking like a guy who got stood up. All I could think about was Sienna, her laugh, the way she said things without sugarcoating them, the way she looked at people like she was quietly studying their truth. And then the next morning my phone buzzed. A message, unknown number, but I already knew who it was. Sienna. Morning. Just checking. Did you survive the tiramisu? I smiled before I could stop myself. Adrien. Barely. Still emotionally recovering. 3 dots appeared immediately. Sienna. Good. I'd hate to be responsible for your tragic dessert-related demise. I leaned back against the kitchen counter, coffee forgotten in my hand. It felt easy, like we'd already skipped past the awkward phase people usually stumble through. Over the next few days, the messages never really stopped. Nothing dramatic, just small things. She'd text between bar shifts. I'd reply between debugging sessions. Memes, complaints about work, photos of terrible latte art attempts. At one point, she sent me a picture of a drunk customer asleep on the bar with the caption, "Future you if we ever go drinking." I replied, "Bold of you to assume I drink that much." Her response came instantly, "Bold of you to assume I'd let you." 3 days later, we met again, this time on purpose, a small coffee shop near Pike Place Market. I arrived first, but when I walked in, she was already there, camera sitting on the table beside her, black Americano in hand, like she'd been there for a while. She looked up when I walked in, and smiled. Not the playful smirk from the restaurant. This one was softer, warmer. "You're punctual," she said. "I've got a thing about not making people wait." Something flickered across her face. Something thoughtful. "Yeah," she said quietly. I figured. Then she pushed the chair across from her out with her foot, and somehow, that tiny gesture felt more personal than our entire dinner at Bella. Like this wasn't a replacement anymore. This was intentional, and I had a strange feeling. Neither of us were pretending this was just coffee. Coffee turned into 2 hours before either of us noticed. At some point, the cups were empty. The table was cluttered with sugar packets, and neither of us had made the slightest move to leave. Sienna had her camera out now, not using it, just turning it in her hands while she talked. "You ever notice," she said, glancing toward the window, "how people behave when they think no one's watching?" I followed her gaze. A street musician was setting up across the sidewalk, violin case open for tips. What about them? I asked. That's my favorite thing to photograph, she said. Real moments. She unlocked her phone and slid it across the table toward me. Look. The first photo was of an old man sitting on a bus stop bench in the rain. His coat pulled tight around him, but the way she'd framed it, the way the streetlights reflected off the wet pavement, it felt like a story. Wow, I said quietly. She shrugged, but I caught the small spark of pride in her eyes. Just street stuff. These are more than that. She tilted her head. You're being nice. No, I said honestly. I'm being impressed. She looked at me for a second longer than usual. Then she reached for her coffee cup, forgetting it was empty. When she realized, she laughed softly. Great, now I feel judged by a programmer. I write sometimes too, I admitted. Her eyebrows lifted. Wait, what? Nothing serious, just stories. And you didn't mention that earlier? I didn't think it mattered. She leaned forward slightly, suddenly more interested. What kind of stories? I hesitated. That old familiar doubt crept in. The unfinished kind. She frowned. That's depressing. Yeah, I admitted. For a moment she studied me like she was looking at something unfinished herself. Then she said something that hit deeper than she probably realized. You don't seem like someone who quits halfway. I looked down at the table. I do more than I'd like. She shook her head slowly. I don't buy it. There was a strange warmth in her voice now, like she believed something about me that I hadn't quite believed myself yet. Then, almost casually, she said something that made my chest tighten. You know what the weirdest part of all this is? What? She leaned back slightly. If Madison hadn't chickened out, her eyes met mine. We probably never would have met. The thought hung between us. Quiet, unavoidable, and for the first time since Bella, I realized something that made my heart beat a little faster. I was suddenly very glad she hadn't shown up. The drive-in theater was Sienna's idea. Trust me, she'd said over text. It's terrible in the best possible way. An hour outside Seattle, tucked between dark trees and an old gravel lot, the place looked like something from a forgotten decade. Her pickup truck rumbled to a stop near the back row. Perfect spot, she said, killing the engine. The giant outdoor screen flickered to life, casting pale light over rows of cars and trucks. We climbed into the truck bed with blankets and a bag of popcorn she'd insisted on bringing. The movie started 5 minutes later, and it was objectively awful. Some low-budget horror film about mutated bees attacking a small town. The acting was terrible. The special effects looked like they were made with plastic toys. Halfway through the first attack scene, I burst out laughing. Sienna nudged me with her shoulder. Hey, respect the cinematic masterpiece. You're kidding. She grinned. I am, but it's still fun. The cool night air wrapped around us, as we sat there watching the ridiculous chaos on screen. At one point, she tossed popcorn at me when I started narrating the bad dialogue. You're ruining the tension, she said. What tension? The bee just exploded. She laughed again, louder this time. And for a moment, under the dim glow of the screen, it felt easy, too easy. Somewhere in the middle of another ridiculous scene, something changed. Quietly, without warning, her hand found mine. Not dramatic, not hesitant either, just natural. Her fingers laced through mine like they already belonged there. I turned slightly. She was still watching the movie, but I could see the faint curve of a smile on her lips. You okay? She asked softly. Yeah. I squeezed her hand gently. Better than okay. Neither of us pulled away. We stayed like that through the rest of the movie, through exploding bees and terrible acting and cheap jump scares. When the credits rolled, the lot slowly started emptying. But neither of us moved. The truck sat quietly under the dim parking lights. Sienna finally turned toward me. The playful energy from earlier had softened. Her voice was quieter now. Adrien. Yeah? She hesitated for a second, like she was deciding whether to say the next part out loud. Then she did. I like you more than I planned to. My heart skipped in a way that surprised even me. I like you too. She studied my face carefully. Good, she said softly. Because for a moment there, I was starting to wonder if I imagined all of this. And before I could respond, she leaned closer, and the air between us suddenly felt charged with something neither of us could pretend wasn't there anymore. I should have known the past wouldn't stay quiet. Stories that start with someone running away rarely end that neatly. 3 weeks after the drive-in, things with Sienna had settled into something real. Not labeled yet, but real. Late-night texts, coffee before her shifts, her camera gear scattered across my living room floor while she edited photos, and sometimes quiet moments where neither of us said much at all. Those were my favorite. But one Tuesday night, while I was still at the office wrestling with a stubborn piece of code. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. I almost ignored it. But something made me open the message. Adrien, it's Madison. My stomach tightened immediately. The text continued. I know I don't deserve a reply, but I'm really sorry about Bella. I panicked. I messed it up. Can we talk? I stared at the screen for a long moment. Not angry, just tired. 3 weeks ago, that message might have mattered. Now it just felt like someone reopening a door I'd already closed. I typed slowly. What happened that night? The reply came instantly. Paragraphs of explanation. Fear. Overthinking. Convincing herself I'd hate her in person. That the date would flop. That she'd embarrass herself. Every sentence centered around one thing. Her fear. Not the hour I'd sat alone in that restaurant. Not the embarrassment. Just her panic. I rubbed my forehead, then typed the only honest response I had. You should have texted me that night. There was a pause. Then another message appeared. Are you seeing Sienna? That one made me freeze. I hadn't mentioned her. Not once. I read the message again. Then another one appeared. She told me she went to Bella. Something twisted in my chest. I typed back. Yeah, I am. 3 dots blinked for a long time. Then the final message came. I figured. I just wish I'd been braver. I didn't reply. Instead, I blocked the number and tossed the phone onto my desk. For a moment, I thought that would be the end of it. But 10 minutes later, my phone started vibrating again. This time it was Sienna calling. The moment I answered, I heard something in her voice I hadn't heard before. Not anger. Something worse. Distance. Adrien, she said quietly. Are you listening to the radio right now? My stomach dropped. No, why? There was a long pause on the other end. Then she said something that made the blood drain from my face. Because Madison is on air right now. Another silence. And then, she's telling the entire city about you. For about 3 seconds, I couldn't breathe. Wait, I said slowly. What? Sienna didn't answer right away. I could hear background noise on her end. Music, glasses clinking. The bar. She's on 104.7, Sienna said finally. Some morning show segment. Big romantic apologies or something stupid like that. My chest tightened. What exactly is she saying? Sienna exhaled. She's telling the story. How she matched with this amazing guy. Talked for weeks. Then panicked and stood him up. I closed my eyes. And now she's asking for a second chance. The office suddenly felt too small. Too quiet. You're kidding. I wish I was. I stood up, pacing slowly beside my desk. I didn't ask for this, I said quickly. I know, Sienna replied. Her voice softened slightly. I believe you didn't set it up. But? There was a pause. Then she said something that hit deeper than the radio drama. But Adrien, we still haven't talked about us. That stopped me. What do you mean? I mean, she said carefully, we've been going out, spending time together, holding hands, kissing. Another pause. But we never actually said what this is. The truth in her words landed hard. She was right. I'd been letting things stay undefined. Safer that way. Less pressure. Less risk. But suddenly I understood something. That vagueness wasn't protecting us. It was leaving space for doubt. Sienna, I said quietly, I don't want this to turn into drama. It already has, she said gently. And that's exactly why we need clarity. Silence stretched between us. Finally, she spoke again. I need a little time to think. My chest tightened. About Madison? No. Her voice was softer now. About whether I'm just the girl who showed up after someone else didn't. That sentence hit harder than anything Madison had said on the radio. Sienna, I'll call you later, she said. And then the line went dead. I stood there in the quiet office for a long time after that, because in that moment, something finally became painfully clear. The real choice in front of me had nothing to do with Madison. It had everything to do with Sienna, and whether I was brave enough to stop drifting and actually choose her.